Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vaishali Sampat, and I'm a member of the BOMA GLA Sustainability Committee. Welcome to the first of our LunchCast series, part of BOMA GLA's Green Bite Sustainability Education Initiative. Our committee launched this initiative to provide members with timely and actionable information they can use in operating and managing their assets and lowering their environmental impacts. This webinar series is designed especially for property owners, managers, and engineers, and will be recorded and available for later viewing at bomagla.org. Today, we're pleased to have Dave Hodgins and Marika Erdely discuss regulatory updates for the city's LA EBEWE ordinance and CA AB802. Dave is the executive director for LA Better Building Challenge, where he leads the city's efforts to engage public and private sector building owners around citywide energy and water performance targets. Dave's team also staffed the LA Energy and Water Resource Center, a one-stop shop to support buildings through compliance with the city's existing buildings energy and water efficiency ordinance. Marika Erdely is the CEO of Green Economy, an experienced benchmarking company, and is listed on the LABBC's service directory. They perform audits and install energy efficiency retrofits. We hope you find today's presentation valuable and ask that you visit bomagla.org for additional resources and to give us feedback on the LunchCast series. Now I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Great, thank you, Vaishali, I appreciate it. Well, it's a pleasure to be here on BOMA's first Sustainability LunchCast. They've asked me to provide an update on the city's existing buildings efficiency ordinance, or EBEWE for short, EBEWE some call it, and how that relates to California Assembly Bill AB802, which has some similar requirements. The two overlap in certain ways, so we want to make sure that the differences are clear, because a lot of you are operating buildings or own buildings that are in one or both of those areas impacted by those pieces of legislation. As Vaishali said, the LA Better Buildings Challenge is a network of LA's top performing buildings. We're really proud to partner with BOMA, longstanding partnership, to help connect the dots where we can and provide that line in to the city to help you get through all of the different complexities that you deal with each day. A little bit of context of where we work. We are part of the city's Sustainable City Plan, and we're funded by LADWP and SoCalGas to do this work, focusing around energy and water conservation. And next month, I'm very excited to announce with BOMA International and BOMA GLA a partnership around water and waste. So look out for emails on that. But I'll leave it with a note that the mayor and all of the city departments have very comprehensive and clear goals, and LA is really leading the nation, and all of you are a huge part of the solution to these important issues that we're all facing. A graphic to kind of show where we work, but it's really 1 foot in the policy space, working with government and utilities. I mentioned we're funded by the utilities, so all of our services and resources are free of charge. We work also closely with the mayor's office, Department of Building Safety, so we can provide firsthand information, and we represent the city in conversations with the state and other governments about related issues. Obviously, and most important, we understand where you're coming from as owners and operators of buildings. I come from the real estate industry, as does the rest of my team. But we're laser focused on energy and water conservation efficiency, and are here to provide some help to get through all this stuff. And then, of course, technology, keeping abreast of that. All of the incentive programs is also a value that I think we bring. And we couldn't do it without partnerships, as I mentioned, BOMA, and we try to work closely with all of the industry groups that are doing work in this area so that everybody's getting consistent messaging, and that's what we're trying to do today. And everybody has the current information and can get that out through the various channels, because everybody is very busy. So with that, I'll get into the subject matter. This is a little graphic on the various services that we offer. Benchmarking has been a part of the Better Buildings Challenge from the beginning. So when the city passed this ordinance, it was natural for them to ask our team to staff a resource center, which is open to all buildings that are covered by the existing buildings ordinance. I think everybody on this call, it probably is, It now applies to all buildings 20,000 square feet and up, except a very limited carve out for certain entertainment related facilities or facilities that are not under the jurisdiction of the Department of Building and Safety, DBS. So we have a separate website. We have resources there related specifically to the ordinance. And that is separate from, but related to the Better Buildings Challenge work. So powered by LA Better Buildings Challenge. Everybody, I think, at this point is familiar with the basic requirements of the ordinance, so I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to talk about just a few updates. Some of this still is in process. I'll be transparent about where that is the case, and some of it is nailed down, and we're working very hard with our city partners to nail down all of it so that you all can move forward and plan accordingly. And then our other speaker today, Marika Erdele, is going to provide a third-party consultant's perspective as she's guided a number of her clients through this process of things to look out for. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have at this stage to the best of my ability. So the major update that I'll be sharing is some improvements to LADWP's data request process. I think everyone's going to be very pleased with the new process. It's a big improvement. Also to point out, for those that maybe weren't aware or haven't looked in a minute, that the data for the first 2 years of reporting has been posted publicly, and the city is working on ways to make to visualize that data and start analyzing it, but it's up there. So if you want to see how your buildings or your clients' buildings are looking, you can find that information. I'll show some of our initial analysis of that, but the city's starting to get into that and see what they can learn. I think it will also ultimately be helpful for industry, particularly on the water side, but I'll get to that in a minute. Performance phase, as we call it, is the piece that starts in 2020 that has to do with reductions, audits, and retrocommissioning. I'll talk about that, some updates there, and specifically audit and retrocommissioning standards, how to move forward on that, where we're at in the process. I know a lot of people have been asking, and we've been getting a lot more questions recently about that. So the big one, if you requested aggregated data from DWP already, either last year or the year before that, or assuming both, if you requested the year before that, you do not need to request it again. So you do not need to go back and submit the proof of ownership and the other documentation and wait and do all of the back and forth. That process is done. DWP is has already uploaded historical data for the past 5 years to most, if not all, accounts for buildings that have requested in prior years. We are aware, of course, that Portfolio Manager is down right now because of the government shutdown. Messaging from the city is to continue with efforts to comply for this year. And if it gets to the point where there needs to be an alternate compliance path or extensions granted, they'll cross that bridge when they get to it. But as of now, the recommendation is to sit tight. The deadline for requesting data, because DWP bills in arrears generally at least a month, if not 2 months, is February 1st or March 1st, really. So if you were to request it today, they wouldn't even have the data. So really this whole issue of Energy Star being down should not affect anyone's overall timeline or ability to comply. So best advice is to sit tight. Hopefully it will be back up soon. And when it is, you'll see 5 years of data already populated in there, and you don't need to take any further action to get the data. You do still need to take the actions to submit the benchmarking report to Building and Safety, and you do, unfortunately, still need to pay that $63 and change fee to Building and Safety. But as far as requesting the data, you do not need to do that. If you've been uploading it manually for the past couple of years, you have the option to now request it from LADWP, and they will upload it. Then another cherry on top is that going forward, they will provide automated monthly updates. And so this is aggregated whole building electricity and water data will be updated monthly, as Edison and SoCalGas have been doing. DWP will now do the same. So you won't have sort of lumpy data across your portfolio. If you've got buildings in SCE and PG&E and San Diego and LA, all of that will be updated. Another major change to the process is a relaxation of that whole proof of ownership process. We anticipated that that was going to be a burden. I think everybody is it's not news that the stance that utilities have taken about this data has been that it is highly confidential and competitively sensitive, and in certain cases that's certainly true. But the process for verification of authorization to receive the data was onerous and created a lot of hangups. And AB802 explicitly relaxed that burden of proof, thanks in part to some lobbying from stakeholders in LA, but also around the state. That gave LADWP some comfort that there was room to relax that requirement, and they're in the process of doing so. So again, now is not the time to go request data because they don't even have it yet for December, and you need to have an entire calendar year's data to do the benchmarking. But in February or March, when you go to request it, the anticipation is that this process will be reflected on the website. You will not have to provide the same type of proof of ownership document. It'll be a simple letter self-certifying that the individual requesting the data is authorized to do so. And again, if you or your consultant has requested data in prior years, there's no action necessary, period. So this should make things much easier and reduce a lot of the paperwork and confusion and back and forth between those requesting the data and LADWP. I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic that this is all going to roll out smoothly and work well. But just to underline, and I probably should have a bullet point here, that does not mean you don't need to do anything else. You do still need to submit the benchmarking report, run the data quality checker, advisable, of course, to compare that to prior years and see how things are going. And I'll get to that a little bit more when I talk about the performance phase. This is just a visualization. I think I touched on this already, so I won't belabor it, but this is an image from the mayor's open data site. So if you want to see the data set for the first 2 years of compliance, it's on there by building address and building ID, along with the summary statistics. So if anyone is interested to see how you're doing, your client's buildings are doing, that's where you would find that. Here's a quick analysis. The data is a bit noisy given that the data set itself, the set of covered buildings, changed dramatically from year 1 to year 2, because year 1 was 100,000 square feet and up, year 2 was 50,000 square feet and up. Now we're in year 3, 20,000 square feet and up. After that, we'll be at a stable state in terms of the universe of buildings that are benchmarking on an annual basis, and we'll start to see patterns that maybe make a little more sense. But the city is looking at this data. I think it's interesting for a lot of reasons. Some things are not surprising. Some others jump out. I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but I believe BOMA is going to post the slides on the website. So if anyone wants to download those and look more into it, by all means. Water is where LA is pretty unique, and I think this is really fascinating data. This is showing 16 and 17 by property type. Again, the data is pretty noisy, and so this will need to level off after this year for us to really start learning anything about it. But basically, the data is up there, and it helps us to start answering a question about, what is an efficient building in terms of water? And I know this is a big focus for BOMA, and one of the central components of our partnership around water that we'll be launching next month. So I'm really excited to dig into that with the BOMA team. So to get back to the ordinance, what next? So the performance phase begins in 2020. It was originally supposed to start this year. Then the deadline was pushed out by a year, so it will start in January 2020. So we've been in the top part of this diagram of benchmarking for 2 years now, going into the 3rd year. Now we're at this bottom piece of now action. There are a few different options for those actions based on the type of building. Simple buildings, meaning without a central cooling system, which means a chiller plant basically, can choose from a list of prescriptive measures. I think most of you probably do have central plants in your buildings. And so for those buildings, there's some other options. And so the good next step to take now is to determine what is the 5-year performance period for your building. If you haven't already done that, it's definitely time to do so. That's based off of your assessor identification number, AIN or APN, it's the same thing. You can look that up on the county assessor's website and figure out which one applies for your building. There's a table, we've got it on our website. It's also in the ordinance, a few different places. So you can figure out what is the 5-year time frame, and then figure out whether you think your building qualifies for one of the exemptions. One of those is if you're Energy Star certified, but you need to maintain that. So you have to be certified in the year that your number is up, or in 2 of the 3 prior years. So I won't go into all of that today. I think you've all seen that. If you have any questions or would like to discuss, how to plan for this, I'm happy to do that. That's part of what we offer through the Resource Center. A lot of people, I just want to correct an assumption that it's a mistaken assumption. A lot of people think they have to do an energy audit and retrocommissioning, and that is not the case. The goal of the ordinance is that buildings actually, do projects that save energy and water, that save money, that help the building perform better and serve its intended purpose. So if you have been doing projects, the first thing to do is to figure out how much you've saved over that 5-year period and how close you are to the performance targets, which is 15% reduction on energy and 20% on water. Depending on how much time you have before your number is up, what projects might make sense to do. What projects have you looked at but didn't move forward on for whatever reason? It may make sense to execute before that deadline and hit those targets, rather than perform an audit, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars, and doesn't in and of itself necessarily lead to savings. Retrocommissioning, of course, does, and I'll talk a little bit more about the intent with that, because that is a very broad term that people interpret differently, and I've heard loud and clear that people are having, as we understood and anticipated, difficulty kind of pricing that work. We're very close to having a firm answer for you on that, which I hope to be able to share imminently. So to the extent that you need to move forward with audits and retrocommissioning prior to issuance of that guidance, I've included what I'm able to say at this time, which is that energy audits got to follow the new ASHRAE 211 standard, so it's ASHRAE level 2. The clarification, as I mentioned, on the water audits and then water retrocommissioning and energy retrocommissioning are coming this spring. So we're very close to a final definition, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But I will say that the focus for the retrocommissioning is on basic maintenance and repair and optimization of existing equipment. So not talking about a multi-year process with lots of instrumentation and trending and data logging. That is not what's going to be required. It's looking at your existing equipment, the types of measures that are reasonably observable in the course of a ASHRAE level 2 energy audit. So, just a couple of days on site, not multiple days with lots of data logging, that are common to most buildings and that are low or no cost to implement. So that's the intent of the ordinance. But of course, that terminology is very loaded, the word retrocommissioning. And so the city and DWP have developed a scope that's in the final approval process now that is, as I was saying, focused on existing equipment, repairs, maintenance, optimization of that, things like scheduling, restoration of sensors, looking at set points, things of that nature. So in case, I hope that allays any fears that people might have about some big, costly additional expense. And if you'd like to receive updates, I think I have this link throughout the slides, but please do sign up. We send emails as we have new information. We blast it out to everybody real time, or as close to real time as we're able to release it. More on how to submit any of your exemption or audit and retrocommissioning documentation. The Department of Energy over the last few years has been sponsoring development of a whole suite of tools that help to standardize and streamline energy audits, and more recently, thanks to our work, LA's work, and New York, San Francisco, some other cities, on building tune-ups, retrocommissioning. And the main tool that kind of brings that all together is a platform called Building Energy Asset Score. And within that, there's a tool called Audit Template. And so that is essentially an online form which enables standardized data collection and streamlined submittal to a central agency, in this case, the Department of Building and Safety, of audit data. And so Pacific Northwest National Labs is tasked with actually building out that platform. They're doing that now with a planned launch in summer of this year. So that platform will be the single platform, the one-stop shop for submittal of all of your performance phase data and documentation, whether that's showing proof that your building is Energy Star certified and meets the plumbing code, or actually entering the energy and water audit and retrocommissioning tune-up data. There is a way to submit all of that through that platform. It'll be based on your unique building ID, so that it will be easily filed and matched by the city on the back end. So this does not mean that that platform needs to necessarily be used for the field data collection. It's a way of submitting data to the city in a standardized format. So we will be doing trainings on this platform in the spring, and we're preparing for that now. Testing is underway on municipal facilities. The city didn't want to, of course, be premature and putting the standard out before they had actually tested it on their own facilities. But the feedback has been very, very good. And we expect that we will launch on schedule in summer of 2019. I should say this is not just something that LA is doing. New York and San Francisco have already adopted Asset Score as the platform for their audit and retrocommissioning requirements. Seattle is doing so as well, and also Atlanta. So LA would actually be like the 5th city, I believe, to adopt this when they do. And again, please do sign up for updates. We will be doing trainings. If you've got an urgent need to get going sooner, please contact me and we can discuss how to go about that. AB802 is the statewide law, and so this just has to do with benchmarking of energy and disclosure thereof. The city of LA has our own ordinance, obviously, as I've been talking about, and when you comply with that, when you submit the data to Building and Safety for EBEWE, the city then turns around and submits that to the state. So no further action is needed on your part to comply with AB802 if you have already complied with EBEWE. As I mentioned, there's a small carve out of certain buildings that don't need to comply with the city ordinance that would need to comply, that do need to comply rather with the state ordinance. So that would be state-owned facilities, as well as the others that are named in the ordinance. So this is probably not as relevant for those on this call, but have it here in the slides just in case. San Francisco and Berkeley also have ordinances that CEC has reviewed and approved as being adequate and a substitute for compliance. But basically, and I have a table here that kind of clarifies this. But if you're in Edison territory and you're in the LA area or Southern California, AB802 is what's relevant for you. So here's a table that I hope is helpful. The EBEWE ordinance, existing buildings efficiency ordinance, that's just LA. And the easiest way to think about that is LADWP service territory. If they're your electric utility, then this is the ordinance for you. If you have Edison, then that would basically be AB802. The property size threshold is different. AB802 is only 50,000 square feet and up. LA is 20,000 square feet and up. LA is energy and water. AB802 is energy only. The other major difference is that the LA ordinance does have these performance requirements, which I was talking about. AB802 doesn't. It's just benchmarking of energy. There are fines, and people have asked about this, and it's not the stance that the city or the state are in right now, but they do have the ability to levy fines. The city fine is not terribly significant, but they are exploring ways of increasing it. The state fine is substantial, can be. Again, they're not in the mode of levying those at this point because this is new for lots of people, but at some point they could do so, and they're in the neighborhood of a minimum of $500 per day, up to $2,000 per day. So that is a pretty serious fine. And of course, if you don't comply with the local ordinance, then they can't send the data up to the state. So I'm not an attorney, but there's a potential there that those fines could flow through. So in case that's coming up in conversations you're having, wanted to make sure I covered that. So I'll transition over to Marika, but just to say that we at the Resource Center have developed a directory of service providers. We've tried to take some of the work off of your plates, property owners and managers, of figuring out who to call. We issued an RFQ to all of the firms that were listed on the EPA's list of registered providers as being having done business in the LA area. We asked them for references. We asked them for information about and proof of the types and number of buildings that they've benchmarked. We administer ongoing trainings, so they demonstrate familiarity with the nuance of the LA ordinance. And so those firms who pass that test are listed on the website with some additional information, and that's a screenshot of it. You can find the link there. We also have a template RFP there in case that helps you in your procurement efforts that you can edit for your purposes and hopefully get some good, consistent proposals back. We found that this can be, well, it's extra work if this wasn't something that you have the in-house resource to deal with. It can be cost-effective and less headache to outsource that function. And would recommend, if you're thinking of doing that, to look at this directory of providers. If a firm is approaching you that's not on this list, I would recommend you send them our way, and we can do some of that due diligence for you. And if they're doing business in LA, if they've got a track record, it'll be no problem for them to get through the process and get on the list. So with that, I will hand it over to Marika. And just a reminder, the deadline for this year is June 1.
Hi, I'm Marika Erdely, CEO and founder of Green Economy, and we're an energy consulting construction company in Los Angeles. And we've been benchmarking buildings since 2009. So we've done a lot of buildings, over 850 buildings in the LA area. So what I'm going to talk about today is what do you do if you do decide you're trying to put your building into Portfolio Manager and prepare the compliance report yourself, and you're completely frustrated and you're like, okay, I'm done. What do I need to do? And you decide to call one of the service providers on that list. So one of the things that it's important to do is get the documentation together. It's going to make it a lot easier for anyone to prepare the report if you are able to get this information together. So I'm going to go through some of that documentation. So hopefully this will help you if you decide to hire a third party. So one of the most important things is to get the letter. We like to see the letter from the Department of Building and Safety and making sure, in fact, that the building does need to comply. Sometimes the letters come and a building, they're assuming it's 50,000 square feet, but the building is actually made up of 10,000 and a 40,000 square foot, and maybe it didn't need to comply. And last year when the amount was at 50,000 and above. So it's really important to look at that letter, and we always confirm with the Department of Building and Safety that the building does need to comply. We also, if you haven't set up a login on the LADBS website, that is something you can do, or we can do it for you. But if you have done it, then that's something you want to make sure you've kept the username and password, so you could pass that on to your consultant, because they're going to need that to upload the report into when the report has been prepared in Energy Star software. The utility bills are very important, obviously, to get, because we like to know what the account numbers are, what the service numbers, how many meters. If you don't know how many meters, we always like to have a count of how many meters are in the building, especially in multi-tenant buildings. That's one of the things. We have a tenant survey that we have someone, the tenant complete, but it also, one of the focuses of that is also how many meters are in the building. So when the data comes over from LADWP, we can confirm that the number of meters does match what we have been told. So getting the most recent LADWP meter and water meter and gas meter is just good for us to have that information as well. We're going to be using that when we prepare an utility authorization form, because you do have to still request the information from the utility. For multi-tenant spaces, we like to see a rent roll. This is important so we can make sure that, especially in, let's say, in a retail environment where you have different types of uses, that we provide the correct tenant survey for that use. So if you have a restaurant versus a grocery store versus a cleaners, all of those require a separate tenant survey. So we like to make sure we get the right survey to the right tenant, but also that we've received them all, because all of those surveys, the square footage of all those spaces has to equal the total square footage of the building. So it's an important kind of a reconciliation tool to have that rent roll. So now accessing the utilities portals has been a big project, and I think Dave mentioned how that's going to be easier, which hooray, that's great. LADWP has kind of been at the back end of getting all of that completed for the users. So one of the things what we had needed before was the letter of authorization from LADW2 that we sent to LADWP from the building owner, and basically what we were just having is everyone copy and paste the letter that we've designed onto the building owner's letterhead. They sign it, and then we can put that information into the portal. So the utilities have these portals, if you think of them that way, and that data or authorization forms have to go into those portals for the data to then be downloaded into the meter. Because in the Energy Star software, you're setting up the building, and then you're setting up the meter associated with the building, and then this process of entering the authorization forms into the utilities portal will give the utility authorization to within 30 days, although sometimes it does take longer, but they do have 30 days in which to download it. And frankly, we found that last year in May, a lot of people hired us, and the 30 days was not enough. There was not, the data did not come in 30 days, and a lot of those clients were fined because they did not meet the June 1 deadline. So waiting till May is not a good idea. You want to get this process started earlier. And in fact, sometimes it takes longer than 30 days. So it's important, one of the key areas that's super important with the tenant survey is really understanding what the operations of the tenant is, and that would include how many hours the tenant is working in the facility or in their space, how many people use the computers. It depends, of course, the survey depends on the use of that space or that building, but it's really important to get that information from the tenants because that can really sway the Energy Star score. So if you're not filling out that information for the tenant or for the building owner, whoever's occupying the space with effort and really to the best of your ability, it can definitely affect the score of the building. So it's important to take time, and sometimes tenants don't want to be involved, they don't care, but really it is an important piece, and it is something that should be reevaluated every year because the tenant's operations could change, the number of people in the facility or whatever questions relate to that use can change. So it's important to do this every year, and we always do this with our clients. So a couple of best practices that I thought were important to mention is always confirm your building gross area, gross floor area, and compliance date before beginning the process. Sometimes it's unclear, like I said earlier, where somebody thinks they need to comply and they don't have to comply because their building is actually a smaller square footage than what they thought it was from Department of Building and Safety's letter said it was a 50, but it really wasn't. So it's important to confirm what compliance you need to meet, whether it's the 20,000, 50, or 100. And as I said, you want to make sure you submit the requests to the utilities before March 1st because it does take a while. There's a difference between service numbers and account numbers. Service numbers many times are for the building and account numbers are for the meters, and the utility authorization forms that are needed to be signed for the data to get into the utility portal uses the service numbers, and sometimes people put in the wrong numbers on those forms and the utility will reject it. So the form has to be properly completed. Important to every utility has a little bit of a different process to connect to the meter, and so that's an important thing to understand is which utility requires what process. And sometimes people think parking lots aren't included. If the parking lot's in that meter, it needs to definitely be included. Or if there's a meter, separate meter for the parking lot, that also needs to be included. And again, identifying the actual use of the building is important. It might be industrial, but there might be something very specific happening in the building. So the building is important to what kind of building it is, but then within the building, there's about 80 different uses. So it's important to note that. Make sure the data is for the full 12 months, and it can actually go to 13 months in order to calculate the score. But if you only have 11 months of data, the Energy Star software will not produce a score. So you want to make sure it's always, even though the reporting is June 1, we're always reporting for the full calendar year prior, so January to December 2018. And there's also a section where you have to add in the Energy Star software, we are going to be adding the LADBS building ID number. So that's something else that you want to keep on hand because that is an important number. So if we have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Marika, at Green Economy.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. We try to keep it short and sweet, ending right here at 12:50 to give everyone 10 minutes to get back to work. So we have some great topics upcoming through the BOMA Sustainability LunchCasts, and stay tuned. We will be posting a copy of the slides as well as a recording to the BOMA website. Thanks, everyone.